very excited to have Tina Ingraham here with us tonight. Her current exhibition, Stills Scapes, which we're all sitting in. I think Tina has really outdone herself with this show. Absolutely gorgeous still lifes and landscapes, and we're just really, really thrilled with how it turned out. So just a couple points, mainly for the people who are streaming, watching it on the live stream. If you have questions during the talk, just go ahead and type them into the comments. There's a bit of a time delay between the live stream and us here in the gallery, so just type them when you have them, and then we can wait till the end and read them. But if you wait until the very end, we may not see them in time. So now just a little bit about Tina before I turn it over to her. She's originally from Ohio. She received her undergraduate degree in design at the University of Cincinnati. And if you haven't been to our other gallery, Coast Street Arts, we have some of her fashion drawings up over there right now. Which, well, you can see when they date back to when you're over there, but we don't need to get into that now. And then she received her MFA from Brooklyn College. She paints in the tradition of the Cape Cod School of Art, which dates back to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And her work is largely influenced by her study with Leonard Anderson. She also spent 3 years in Italy, where her work matured as she traveled to Europe, studying old master works, mosaics, and contemporary painters that have enriched her palette and informed her continued research of historical techniques and painting surfaces. Tina is also a recipient of many awards, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Milton and Sally Avery Foundation, grants from the Maine Commission for the Arts and Pollock Krasner Foundation, and residency fellowships from McDowell Colony, Dorland Mountain Art Colony, and the Robert M. McNamara Foundation. She's also taught at the International School of Painting, Drawing, and Sculpture, Bowdoin College, Hyde School, Brooklyn College, and Stevens College. And with that, I turn it over to Tina. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. Thanks everyone for being here. It's great to have an audience because the last time I did this 3 years ago, it was during the pandemic and there were just a few of us in here. So it's wonderful to have an audience. Thank you, John and Kelly, for and all the crew here at Greenhut, Roy, Dean, Chris, and Holden, and also Diamond at Coast Street for helping to putting this exhibit together. Lots of work, lots of support from all of them. And thank you too for my collectors that have been buying my work over the years, that's kept me painting all these years. So I wanted to ask a question of you. Have any of you ever wanted to reach out and touch a painting? Yeah. Anybody want to share? Okay. And I wanted you to think about what invited you, what pulled you in to want to engage with the painting. So the word touch. The first time I heard the word touch in reference to painting was in graduate school, and a wonderful painter who lives in Israel, Eran Reshav, one morning before class asked me, "So did you touch it?" And I said, "Touch what?" And he said, the painting we did in class last week. Did you touch it?" And that was the first time I had ever heard touch in reference to the surface of a painting, or going back into it, or working on it again. And in preparing for this talk tonight, I was thinking about what that implies. It implies a sensitivity, a circumspection about what is going to happen next when one resumes a painting, gets into the process of painting. And I realized that it implies a skin. And because when I think of touching, I think of reaching out to a loved one or a family member, and so therefore skin. Now in my past career, which was in costume design, we referred to fabric as having a hand. And it also had, some fabrics had various naps. And I've learned over the years that there's a commonality between working on a surface or a canvas and what my past career was. And so that's something else that I like to keep in mind. So the word touch, like I said, implies a skin. And actually that is what I call the surface of a skin, painting. It has a skin. And so that makes me wonder, so what's underneath that epidermis, right? And so tonight I thought I would share with you what goes on beneath the skin of my paintings. And that involves, so where am I? It involves my experiences, my years as a musician, being a mom, being a grandma for kids, for grandchildren, my previous career, all the paintings I've looked at over the years, hundreds, my years in the Philippines, in Italy, lots of experience, lots of adventures, lots of ups and downs. And that's what's involved in making decisions in my work. It all comes together. I think of a surface of a painting as a palette on which I work out all of these various experiences and influences that I've had over the years. And so I have a palette on which I mix my paints, and then I have a palette on which I work out the various challenges that a painting presents. So I thought that I would talk about how my color, this question has come up, how do I approach color in my painting? How has the color changed over the years of my career? What else? How do I approach still life? How do I set up a still life? What influences do plein air painting have on my still life and vice versa? And other influences. Are there any questions yet? Okay. So I begin a painting with a veil of warm, transparent color so that I can see through to the canvas. There are times when I'm composing a painting, as in Tango, New Ways to See Color, where did it go? Vessels in Light, various paintings in the show in which I block out the white of the canvas and never touch it again, because I'm planning for that to be the highest white of the painting. So sometimes I will do a drawing in charcoal first before I lay down the veil of transparent color. And sometimes, and in that case, I will spray it with a very light fixative to hold the drawing after I put the paint on. And then other times, I'll just do the drawing after the veil of color has been laid on. And we'll continue to work over that. The charcoal in that instance will sometimes just sort of disappear within the brushed on paint. And sometimes I will work to keep the charcoal showing, like in the painting on the back wall, Maine Eastern. So you can see that if you're, actually you can, I can see, I know what's there. So if you're up close, you can see the charcoal has been left. Let's see. So I need to go on with that. So after I've begun the drawing and the veil. I just lay on paint with large brushes fairly quickly, and the painting will take on kind of a soft look. And then I build the color, looking for commonalities in tones, where tones come together in the same value. So there might be a warm tone and a cool tone that come together, but they're of a different hue. And so in those passages, that gives me fluidity. So in this painting, West Point Peninsula, the harbor there, you'll see that there are several tones of blues and blue-greens within the sea. And so this is what is commonly called tonal painting. And it's very fluid, but it excites the surface a bit. But it's all of one. That's what I like to think of it as. So there's this fluidity to it. And then the other places of differences, also in this painting down here, there's a lot of that. That's something that I really worked with circumspection. I wanted this blue of the dish towel to work into the top of the table of this blue cloth, invite the handle of the blue pitcher, and move down into the fall of the cloth in the foreground, and also the blue here meeting the gray of the side of the box. So these very close tonal colors help you move through the painting. This stops you. And here I've used charcoal to help. So that's how I work through a painting now. Also, this painting has a lot of work in it. There was a blue glass here at one point. There was a salt shaker there at another point. And there was a pitcher there, a little white gravy pitcher there at one point. And I just kept scraping it off or painting over it because nothing seemed to work until I realized I don't need anything there at all. And so I'll do a lot of scraping, which activates the surface. And over years, over time, and even now, if you really look closely, you'll be able to see a ghost of something under the layers of the painting. So it makes the surface more exciting, engaging, and a bit of a mystery is there. And over time, the pentimenti will maybe expand a little bit, and that darker tone will come through even more, which will even make the painting that much more exciting and give conservators and historians all kinds of things to talk about. So how has my color approach changed over the years? So the first person to influence me was Mom, my mother. She was a color artist, and this was before the advent of color photography. I don't know if any of you know about it, but do you remember the high school, grade school, sepia-toned photographs of us when we were growing up? And she would take those sepia-toned photographs and paint over them with transparent tinted oils. I still have her palette, her little oil painting case. And I watched her do that. I was just a little kid. And I hadn't realized it at the time that that was my first experience in understanding or learning about grisaille, which is a traditional way of painting like Titian did and Gilbert Stuart did of George Washington. So that was my first experience in learning about paint. It's pretty difficult stuff to learn as a little kid. And then in 1965, as John said, I studied to be a fashion designer. I also worked in fashion illustration. up until the mid-'80s as a freelance illustrator. Then in 1978 through 91, I painted in watercolor. And I was self-taught, except for a class I think I took with Marcia Donahue at Mecca, before it became Mecca. And there I learned about keeping the white of the paper untouched and utilizing that as the white of the painting. Because working with transparent watercolors, there's no way you're going to get white. So I have brought that all the way forward after all of these years into my oil painting, as you will see again in new ways to see color and the highlight in this picture is the white of the canvas. And it requires a lot of planning ahead. In the painting on the back wall, to the left of the piling in the foreground, that's a white chunk of canvas showing. And as the painting progressed, I liked it so much, but realized I hadn't planned for what I put on the right side along the same area in the water. I took white titanium paint, mixed it with a little bit of egg, and troweled it on to get that same white. I wanted that abstraction of white on either side of the piling. Then in 81 to 86 was very pivotal for me. I studied portrait painting with Dan Green. I went to his studio in for 2 weeks 1 year, 1 week another year, and then the third year I studied with him. I planned an entire summer studying with him, 9 to 5, pre-mixing a huge palette of colors, pre-mixed palette every morning from 8 to 9, and again in the afternoon from 12 to 1 to prepare for his afternoon class. It was a pre-mixed palette that he taught in painting portraits. So that was my introduction into palette organization. Before I was just painting in oils with a brush, mixing it on a big wood palette, and painting very instinctively, not having any education oil painting at all. So my work then didn't have any change in viscosity of the paint. It was laid on pretty uniformly. He taught to knock back the ridges of the paint. He taught using a fan brush. Oh. This looks like a fan. And that's where I became aware of the nap of paint. If you knock the paint back in the wrong direction against the light, it's going to be like velvet when you go, and it's not going to be the color that you intended when you put it down, right? So that's where I learned about a palette of colors. Then I learned about skin tones, all skin tones. And so after fashion design, my second early career was portrait painting. And I painted a portfolio of about 6 paintings so that I could sell commissions of all skin colors, skin types, men, women, children. Really worked very hard to start that business. And the next pivotal year was 1993. I went to Vermont Studio Center and studied there. It was 2 weeks of just painting. And there were 3 contemporary master painters there at the time. The one that I'm going to talk about today is Marjorie Portnow. She was living on Vesper Street in New York and Manhattan and teaching in Pennsylvania Pennsylvania at the Academy in Philadelphia. She had studied with Lennart Anderson also at Brooklyn College. She taught me various palettes of color to work with. She taught me limited palettes, the bright palette, the limited bright palette, the extended bright palette, the earth palette. And she kept me very busy for 2 weeks. And I don't think she realized that I was going to be that involved in learning from her. So I practiced what she taught me. I wrote it all down. And I still in my work, go back to that. Those mixtures are still there for me to go to when I feel like I want them. And then 1994 to 96, I studied at Brooklyn College, City University of New York with Lennart Anderson. And his influence had to do with tonal painting and the tradition passed down through from Charles Hawthorne and Edwin Dickinson, then Lennart Anderson, and then those of us. Janet Mannion was in this gallery for a while. Other artists that paint in that tradition now are David Marshall in New York State, Western New York State, Judith Wire, who is painting in Connecticut, and myself. Right offhand, those are the only, Carolyn Judson also. She paints in Brunswick, and she studied with Lennart as well. So there aren't a lot of us left, but in my teaching, I've passed those processes, that tradition of painting on to my students. The other person, 2 other people that I wanted to talk about briefly, having to do with modernism and how that's influenced my work. So Paul John Fania was an art historian who taught the history of painting. And in his class, we learned about the process that Titian used in developing his painting, using a ground of Venetian red, letting it dry thoroughly on a wood panel, and then working with grisaille, or an underpainting in gray tones leading up to white, and working over that with transparent oil paints. And where did you hear that before? From my mom. And so I learned, and also Dan Green taught that to me as well. I forgot about Dan. So I had 3 courses of education on indirect painting. It's a division of labor. You learn how to build a painting, structure a painting with value first. It can be dark to light. And then direct painting, which is applying paint directly to the canvas. First, you mix the color you want. You don't fool around. You find the values, whether they're close together or far apart, and you apply them to the canvas. So this painting here, New Ways to See Color, and I'm going to take a drink while you focus in on that. New Ways to See Color. There's a lot of processes used in this painting. So there's the veil of warm tone underneath. You can see some of it here. And I've let it show through in various places because the light is streaming through the window. And I don't know if you've ever noticed that when light comes through the window and you're looking at it, it's almost blinding, but it has a way of creating an atmosphere that's very engaging, It's a lovely atmosphere. But what it does to the same subject matter, the roses on the left as opposed to the roses on the right, light actually comes through the roses there. And so I've painted over this warm tone with transparent washes. You can actually see the brush strokes here. And then here, I've worked in grisaille. I laid in colors and it didn't feel like a newspaper. This newspaper I had saved since April of 2022. It was the Metro section of the New York Times announcing the museum exhibits that were opening in the spring of 2022. And so I decided to build gray tones or degrees of white and gray over the color and to whiten it, to bring up the light, and where necessary, I again passed transparent tones of warmth here. There's a green in here. I've got a little divot, you know how sometimes a newspaper has a crease in it, there. And it allowed me to bring more detail in the newspaper. So, and the last person that was very influential to me, and it leads us into the discussion of how modernist paintings have influenced me, adding to what I've already said. And that was Jack Flam. That is Jack Flam. He wrote a Matisse retrospective, excellent book. He also wrote The Passions of Matisse. And he was very important to me about talking about resolution. How does one resolve a painting? Does it begin? Does it end like a book? No, it goes on. The story goes on. And he told me about the, what is the name of it? It's an essay written by John Klein. It's a spotlight essay on resolution. And he talks about Matisse and his paintings, Still Life with Oranges, both 1 and 2. And how during that time, not only Matisse, Cézanne as well, other painters during that period of time, were rejecting the traditional art techniques that they had learned and were painting 2 paintings of a subject matter. So they would do 2 paintings of a still life. In Still Life with Oranges #2, you can find it on the internet. You can also find this essay on the internet. It's very engaging, very interesting essay on process and resolution. In #2, the bottom left, I think I've told some of my students about this, so sorry to bore you. But the lower left side of the painting is pretty much untouched. It's bare canvas. There's a few brush strokes in there of like a light ochre tone, earth tone. And in the essay, Mr. Klein talks about how the 2 paintings differed. And so what these painters did then, rather than referring to master painters, they would refer to their own work back and forth. And so I'm bringing this up to you in that was something I did with this painting, Vessels in Light, and I don't know if the other one's over here somewhere. Look at it this way. So it was really important for me to experiment with what they did. And I've done it a lot in the past. When I've started a portrait commission, I've started 2. And I'll work back and forth off of each portrait until I find the one that grabs me. And I'm sorry if you want to see this. It's fine. I can just explain it a little bit. So this one I already mentioned that I really went through lots of processes to arrive at the resolution of this painting. I loved this still life that I set up so much. I didn't want to take it down. So I decided to do a second one. And in this one, now my studio does not have that kind of window in it, nor does it have a back room in it. I invented it. I invented another room behind the light warm wall, changed the towel, used the same box, and I took out the vinegar bottle was in this one. Actually, I can see it. It's right in here. Took out the vinegar bottle, but utilized it in this painting and played around with what's in front of what. Is it the bottle or is it the box? And I had that bottle that was to the left of the picture in this painting, but for some reason that bottle in that painting made that picture look huge. And every time I do a painting, I learn something new about relationships and drawing. It is very interesting, so I painted it out. So there you go, my experiment with Matisse. This one. Okay. Yes, this one, yeah. And it's the same palette. It's an orange-blue palette, which I do work with fairly consistently. Yes. Any questions? Yes, back there. Love questions. Yeah?
So I have a question. You were talking about how you lay down a veil of warm color first, like maybe yellow ochre or something like that, like in a prematura layer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about the white canvas. Do you block out sections? So this is a two-part question. Do you block out the sections that stay white? And what kind of ground do you use? Do you use oil ground or just gesso?
If I'm really sure of the composition that I'm going to use, I block it out, like I did in this painting. Let me walk over here and see if there are any over here. Oh, this is a good one. So this painting here, this whole section is the white of the canvas. And if you get up really close to it, you might see some charcoal in there where I've ruled charcoal. I was really sure of where that window was going to be. And I wanted that to stay white. Other times I will put the veil down, and as the painting progresses, I realize, oh, I want that white. So I will take a cloth and blot it with solvent to erase it.
Okay, so do you do that because you think the titanium white would be too opaque and it
Oh,
would
yes.
have the same radiance?
It- And here, if you look right here, that's got titanium over an area. I decided to lower the window. Before it was up here, you can see the ridges of paint. So I decided, I want this window lower. And so I tried to get the same white back, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much titanium white, how much egg I put in the titanium white, I could not get that white back. So it's very important, if you want pure white in your painting, for me, to leave the canvas untouched.
And what is the ground? Is it oil ground?
In some of these, there'll be oil ground, and some will be acrylic primer.
And what is egg?
Pardon?
Egg. What is egg?
Oh, in painting grisaille, the plan is, what the artist wants is for the underpainting to dry as quickly as possible. and to sit up on top of what's ever below it. And adding egg to the paint, and I was using flake white or lead white, which dries very quickly. And then we were using cobalt dryer, horrible stuff, and solvent, and a drop of egg.
And the yolk?
We used both the yolk and the white mixed together. Yes.
But it didn't yellow from the,
No,
just
no.
too much of it.
It's just a drop. And what it does, it makes a nice paste and we also add a little bit of titanium white powder pigment into that mixture. So it would sit up on top of the surface, so it doesn't sink down into the weave or the surface of the wood. If I'm working on a panel, it sits on top. And it's a nice impasto. It's also a nice way to rework a painting that you want to get back into, that the colors have sunken into the canvas. You pull the paint up, you build a new ground. It's like building a new primer, putting a new acrylic primer on top of the painting that's underneath. So that's the purpose of using an oil emulsion.
And chemically it all works so that it doesn't age badly.
But it does not yellow. No, no, no. Any other questions?
That was the question. The egg.
Oh, the egg. I mean, it's such a small amount. It's such a small
But it's just
amount.
actual egg.
What?
It's just like whisked up egg. Just using a little bit of egg.
Just tiny. I mean, it's like,
Is it mostly for white that you do that?
it's for that process of painting, the grisaille process, yeah. So
So
it's,
it takes over, you can paint under and over, and you can do layers of it without it rejecting what's above it.
yes, most of my paintings have that in it. Not most,
Do you
but
use a muller or do you just use a palette knife?
I have a muller, but I use a palette knife to grind the paint onto the palette, the glass palette, yes. Trying to think if there are any other paintings in here. Yes?
Well, you mentioned the pentimenti, and I'm wondering if that memory is more from the texture, from the scraping, or if it's the remainder of the pigment that is coming through.
Good question. Both. Both, yeah. Because what I will also do is if it really has the original paintbrush strokes that I've put down, if it really informs the painting beyond what I want it to do, I will take sandpaper to it. I'll hold something like a piece of wood behind the canvas and really go at the surface to get to eradicate any ridges that might still be there.
Do you still use flake white?
Yes, I do. Mhm. I use flake white and I use lead white, titanium white. I use flake white because it's very transparent, and I have learned from my years of painting in watercolor and my great concern of how to keep light in a painting. And flake white allows me to do that. I can build layer upon layer upon layer. It still allows me to see through to the surface of the canvas, and the surface of the canvas then is allowed to reflect light. Light comes in, hits the white of the canvas, and bounces back. Oil paint is really not opaque. It's transparent. It's how you use it.
It sounds like watercolor.
Yes, it is, very much. It's very much a similar medium. The only, yes.
I noticed a lot of the paintings have an undercoating of orange. It seems, is that the case, or is that just an illusion? I see like orange is a tone to it, but I didn't know if that was.
Up here, this is raw sienna. And because the light was over here, I moved from Old Holland's raw sienna deep. Then I moved, so the underpainting was Old Holland raw sienna deep. Then I moved into raw sienna and then I moved into yellow ochre because I knew my light source was over here and all else would fall away in value, darken from the light source. And so under here, you'll see raw sienna coming through. In here, you might see a little bit of raw sienna, yellow ochre in here, here. So it keeps the light in the painting. Right? Any more questions? Okay. Yes.
Well, if you don't mind going off topic for a second.
Sure.
Hold on a second, wait till you.
It's a,
So actually, what struck me in the show, and maybe just struck me is see that ordinary, when you think about your paintings, and it's not normally a question I would ask, but the titles. So well, landscapes are generally titled up where they are, and maybe some other descriptive thing. You've got the vessels in light, which is another descriptive, but the flowers and the cakes all have rather cryptic titles.
what
So
kind of
Tango,
title?
I think I could come up with.
What kind of
But
title?
Infinity, cryptic.
Oh, cryptic.
Like the
I thought you
beautiful,
said
delicious-
corrupt.
Maybe. Some of these things are corrupting. But, especially that beautiful, I think it's isn't it the red cake on the other side?
Yeah.
It's called Infinity.
Oh, this is a wonderful painting to talk about. It started out that the background was white. It was on a white cloth. The flower was red, a red Gerber daisy. There was the piece of cake that I cut out was here on a white plate. And I looked at the painting. I was like, what does it need? And then I just continued to lay darker tones over the background to darken it because I thought that will make the icing, the cream-colored icing, show more. I then realized that this area down here was starting to look like land. Maybe there was a stream back there. There were no marbles in it. This cloth had red stripes in it. And it completely changed the painting when I realized the implications that this painting had. It was landscape. More so when I threw the marbles on there, much like my grandchildren would, and much like I did as a kid. I didn't place the marbles, I just strewn them across the cloth. And I decided, this was inspired by my grandchildren and my kids, when they do drawings, I put a sun up in the corner of the painting. Now, infinity, I knew this immediately. I saw it immediately when I painted this napkin, when I set it up and put the fork there. That's infinity. So instead of entitling it, what is it, a red velvet chocolate cake, I entitled it Infinity because to me it means the universe. This could be the Earth. This could be a solar system. I mean, it opened up all kinds of possibilities. You can read it any way you want. What?
The marbles are planets.
And the marbles are planets. Yeah, I love to paint marbles. I did that in a painting called Tomato Soup, I think years ago. Sold through this gallery. It either has M&Ms on it or marbles. I can't remember, but thank you. And I replaced the piece of cake with a birthday card that I had received from my son's family, which, by the way, has a sun and sky and landscape on it.
I totally see that painting as about the infinity. I thought you meant years to come. Your birthday never ends.
That too,
Your
see?
age, and it really captures totally my childhood in the colors, and it's just such a beautiful painting.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so in love with that painting.
Oh, thank you.
And it resonates in many, many, many ways. The silver fork, yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Well, yes.
I just have a really quick laugh. I'm sorry, I'm
No,
really asking a lot.
don't
So one of the
apologize.
things that I noticed you have a very kind of calibrated touch with in your work is edge. And in some places the edge is carefully defined, and in some places you let the edge really slide off and kind of haze out or get very messy. Like I love the sort of bright, sort of naphtha looking red section of the strip and that sewing machine piece. Where it really kind of blurs. So I'm wondering if you could just touch on very briefly your relationship to edge.
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm glad you pointed to this painting because that's in my talk about bringing the influences of modernism on my work. When I lived in Italy, I was there for 3 years, and it freed me up to do whatever I wanted as far as painting, studying masterworks, and traveling. The artist that influenced me the most while I was there was Piero della Francesco. And I saw many of his frescoes, and I realized that he pretty much stuck with the primary colors, which was a real eye-opener for me because I had, in Brooklyn College, I had been painting a lot of dark, gray, black, white paintings, very tonally charged, subtle movement from one tone to another. Edges. Lennart taught me in graduate school, watch your edges. Finish your edges when you see them. So when darks meet lights, there's going to be an edge. Where lights meet lights, or same tones meet same tones, there's not necessarily going to be a drawn edge or a striking edge. There will be an edge, if you look closely, created by the juxtaposition of a tone next to another tone that might be of a different value or a different temperature, right? But this red ribbon, red is usually considered a very dark, pretty dark value, really, next to these lighter, higher key greens. It's going to have an edge on both sides. Whereas this lemon yellow green here, this tint of a green, warm tint of a green, on this side, because of the direction of the light, this warm tone meets the light tone. You don't see the edge if you look at it from a distance. But if you get close up, you'll see that there is a differentiation between the patches of paint. So it all has to do, what is your name back there?
Oh, I'm Hillary.
Hillary, thank you for the question. It all has to do with what I see. I work from observation. This sewing machine was sitting in front of me when I painted it. It has a complete drawing underneath in charcoal. And the reason I like to talk about this painting, just like that when it revealed layers, if you will, layers in a cake, it revealed something that I wasn't aware of when I was doing it. Because of my background as a fashion designer and sewing garments, working with cloth, I didn't realize it at the time. This painting was all pretty much done with the tip of a palette knife. So the color was mixed and laid on in patches. Like right here, you can really see it in this stripe. This part, however, was painted with a very small brush. But there are areas where you can see that the palette knife has paint on the end of it and it's been put down either on the tip or the side. So I was thinking that it had something to do with stitching, you know, the stitches. And this is the only painting that I did that way. And I think it was because I was influenced by the subject matter. And that is modernism. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Chesley.
What are your strategies for controlling and keeping the light in the painting in your landscapes as opposed to the still lifes where, to me, it's more important?
Yeah.
Because you've got those edges.
Yes. That's a good question. That was something I was going to bring up in my talk. Was one of the questions from somebody in the gallery was how do you set up a still life, but also what are the influences your still life has on your plein air painting? What does your plein air painting have? How does it influence your still life painting? So this is a topic that I really like to talk about. What I've learned in working in the open air, the first time I worked in the open air, it was pretty serious, was on Monhegan. Never done it before. I'll talk about that later. It's a pretty funny story. But anyway, what I learned was it's lighter out there. Everything outside is lighter than anything inside. That's all you need to know. The ground. Even that in relationship to what's outside is not as light as what is out there during the day. Okay? So that is why I have really learned to engage and to keep the white of the canvas either with keeping it stark white, untouched, or using veils of thin washes over it. To keep the light in a landscape like this one here, I employ the same thought. Keep everything, either anything that's white or related to sky on a sunny day or a light day, keep it light, or a veil. So the sky in this one has a very, very soft veil of a lemon yellow. Old Holland's lemon yellow light, I think. And it's mixed with a lot of medium. And my medium is cold pressed linseed oil or refined linseed oil and some solvent. And it's very light. I mean, you can see the canvas right through it. As the painting progressed, I realized that using the white of the canvas for the water that's reflected from the sky wasn't going to work. It would not have been an interesting painting. So I used my knife. I used the side of the knife and troweled it on to cover as much of what was underneath that to give the feeling of light. Everything, it's a very difficult process, or it's difficult to paint in the landscape and keep the light and depict the light the way it is on a gray day. There's a painting in there, it's not in the show, but it's one of my favorite paintings. It's of West Point Harbor, this same scene, but it's a cloudy day, and the water is very tumultuous, and that painting is different because it was a gray, stormy day. The light in this one, again, it's very transparently painted. And underneath the train trestle there, right under Maine, if you go down that light area, that's just solvent and the veil of paint that's just been left untouched. And once the sky is done, I don't touch it again. Leave it alone. Because the more paint I put on it, the darker it's going to get.
Do you try to end with the opaque white then? Do you try to end with the gray highlight when you're finishing and tying things up?
Only if I need to. If you look at this painting, the highlights are the scratch in my fingernail. Because I want to erase the paint that I put on there, right there.
Oh.
Yeah.
So like what? So thank you. So whenever I need what they used to call sky holes, I think.
Yeah.
A long time ago, I remember, I don't like sky holes. I don't like that term. There's no hole in the sky. Whenever I do need to go back into a painting, like in a forest scene, or like right here, you'll see it in this painting, right there. That's paint. And I learned a lot from looking at Corot paintings of landscape and deep woods. He goes in with white, and he just a fleck of the brush. Nothing regular, just Corot, C-O-R-O-T. So, yeah. The other thing I've learned about highlight, light in paintings, and it was in the other Maine Eastern painting that sold, instead of using white, where I saw there was light, it was just like a light bulb flashing in my mind. I just chose a more saturated blue. And on that gray toned canvas, it was lots of grays and blues and greens. That blue shone like light. It didn't have to be white. It could be more saturated, and that creates the idea of light, the illusion of light. The other thing I've learned about trying to lighten something is if you want a light to appear bright light, just put something dark next to it. Yeah. Okay, any more questions? How are we doing on time? I have no idea.
Right at 7.
Oh, so I didn't get to talk about how I set up still life, but I pretty much went through everything I wanted to talk about. Your questions led me there, which were wonderful. I would just like to close with the original question I had was, what engages you to want to touch a painting? And like any art form, whether it's reading a book or standing on stage, sitting in the audience, watching a performance, musicians, ballet dancers, there's this want to engage. And unlike performances, singers and actors, and even painting, the life is underneath the skin, and it ends with its image. But what's underneath, all that thinking and changing and scraping, that's where the life is in the painting. And also, I'll just throw this out to you because it was like a really interesting thought I had. I was listening to an audio of Ella Fitzgerald singing Body and Soul. And her voice has texture. You could almost touch it like skin. Thank you.